G'day guys and welcome to another episode of the Scouting Australia podcast powered by Australian Property Scout Buyers Agency. I'm your host, Sammy Gordon, and we've had a lot of requests coming in lately, guys, for a very, very particular topic. Everyone's messaging me and sending in messages and all the rest of the stuff about why are interest rates increasing so much? What's going on with inflation? Why are interest rates increasing so much? Does increasing interest rates, do they really affect and curb inflation all that much? Which is the big topic on everyone's sort of tongue at the moment. Is really coming in around this interest rates versus inflation battle. And so what we wanted to do was really jump on an app today and pretty much explain and run through what the media won't tell you, explain it in the ways that we view it. And look, guys, this topic was probably a little bit beyond Big Jimmy. I gave him a call and he said, yeah, mate, I think this one's a bit too far advanced for me. So I'm just going to voluntarily tap myself out of this one. You're going to need someone else. So what we've done is we've brought in the big fella, the big guns, big Luke Teeuwsen. He is my right hand in strategy at Australian Property Scout. The man's got a bachelor's in property economics. He's got a lot of background in property and experience around this all and as well. Mate, I was going to ask you to do an intro, but I think I've already done it. Big Luke Teeuwsen, mate, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here. No, I spoke to Jimmy last night and he said you better get prepared for the show. So I was researching shark-proof suits and some clothing, chainmail clothing, so I don't get ripped a new one. But
did you know the old shark deterrent that you put on your board, mate? Did you bring one of those?
Like an ankle bracelet with the vibrations.
Yeah, you bring one of those? Or?
No, I couldn't find one good enough to.
I'm getting a bit hungry, mate.
That's it. But no, good to be here. So.
Thanks, mate. It's great to have you on. Do you want to give us a little bit more of a wrap about yourself, mate? Give us a bit of background on, on your knowledge, and yeah, man, where you come from, what you've done before jumping on board with Australian Property Scout as a strategist.
Yeah, definitely. So started off actually doing civil engineering.
Wow.
But I've always had a very keen interest in property.
Okay.
And then my older brother's actually a civil engineer, so I saw what he was doing. It wasn't for me. I was like, no, scratch this. We'll get started. So I moved into Bachelor of Property Economics. So I finished that off, and that basically specialized in a lot of different fields: residential, commercial, industrial, but more so looking at the data behind things.
Yes.
So researching areas, researching locations, and that's what I do here as well. A bit of data behind the scenes.
That's it.
But once I finished that, I got an opportunity to move into sort of the financial services space as a financial consultant.
Okay.
And basically what that entailed was helping clients prepare for retirement. So I work with a lot of high-ranking police officers, doctors, principals at schools, paramedics, and everyone in between. And basically did a lot of financial planning, but sort of specialise in investment properties and finding good locations for them and sort of tailoring their investments to their retirement goals and what they were trying to achieve. So I did that for a bit over 3 years.
Cool.
And then I jumped on board with you. So.
100%. And you got a nice, I think the thing that I really like, and you and I talk a lot about self-managed super, and you've got a lot of experience around SMSFs and whatnot as well. And mate, I think you and I sometimes sit there, we'll finish a day of strategies at bloody 6, 7 o'clock at night, and then we'll just chew the fat on bloody supers and what we can do with it, and all these different strategies for another hour or two as well. And I think, man, like I really like your sort of background on the super front as well, and a lot of knowledge around that too, man. So, so that's awesome, man. That's awesome. Well, mate, nice little intro on yourself there. You've got a lot deeper background than Jimmy. We'll put it that way. He empties his pockets. It's dust, you know. There's nothing else comes out of it. The old bastard.
Crickets. He's pulling them out. Crickets. Oh no.
That's it, mate. That's it. Well, mate, what we've got you on for is obviously interest rates versus inflation. So, mate, I want to run through a bit of a background on kind of both, because a lot of people as well starting out, they may not have the deepest idea or knowledge really around inflation and interest rates. They're things that get thrown around a lot by the by the media, mainstream media, and all the rest of it. Man, let's walk through a basic level, I guess, around interest rates. Man, give us a bit of a background, a bit of a. What are they, man? What are they? What's a big one? Because they're obviously huge, right, in the economy. Who governs them? What's it for?
Very simply, interest rates are basically you go to the bank and you want to borrow $100,000. They're not going to give you $100,000 for free, unfortunately. We all wish that was the case. But they will lend money to you for a fee in return,
Yes.
and that's generally their interest. So, for example, you loan $100,000. At the moment, they're between 6 and 7%. So every year, 7% of $100,000, you have to pay them roughly $7,000 a year in interest for that $100,000, and obviously that compounds as you loan more and more. But who sets that is basically the RBA, so the Reserve Bank of Australia. So that tailors into what's called the cash rate.
Yes, that was what I was going to say. Let's strip it back even a little bit further, because interest rates are one thing. Everyone talks about the interest rates, but the cash rate is actually really kind of what you want to keep your eye on, because when that's moving, that's what's actually directly affecting and impacting, homeowners and investors and whatnot as well, right?
Correct. That's exactly right. So the cash rate is basically the Reserve Bank of Australia, what they will loan money out to your big banks for. So if Commonwealth Bank and ANZ, they want money to lend out to their customers.
Yep.
They go to the Reserve Bank of Australia, the RBA, and they set the price in terms of how much they lend that to. So, for example, if the cash rate is 1%, banks can't give you money at 1% because they've got they're going
to make a profit.
They're going to make a profit. Correct. So they've got their costs and profit in. So there's a markup there.
Yes.
So what we've seen, obviously, in the media, it's very, very publicised. You see it a lot. It's doom and gloom. The cash rate was roughly 0.1% for a long time.
Yes. Which is ridiculous, right? Like it's the biggest, it's the lowest that the cash rate's ever been in Australia in its history, right? Like it's
unheard of. Correct.
It's almost free.
Yep.
0.1, literally 0 is free to the banks. They're literally giving it for nothing.
Correct. That's exactly right. So there's been 10 increases in a row. So there was 6.25 increases and 4.5%. Correct. So that's what is heavily publicised at the moment is those increases. And we're not saying that didn't happen. That definitely happened. But we're more so wanting to go into why that happened today and give the viewers a bit of information in that regard.
Definitely, man. Well, let's flip it then to the other side of the equation in terms of inflation. Walk us through inflation, and why is inflation so important to the economy and to the everyday Australian as well?
Correct. So inflation is, as its general concept, is the increase in value of goods and services. So, for example, bread, milk, eggs, fuel. Obviously, fuel's gone up pretty dramatically over the past few years, but every single year, bread, milk, eggs, fuel,
build costs,
travel, etc., are going up in value. So the Reserve Bank of Australia set a bit of a target range for how much they want things to increase by every single year. So that target range is 2 to 3%, and they're pretty fixated on getting
that 2 to 3% target band, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So that 2 to 3% target band is pretty critical to our economy. We don't want it at 0 and we don't want it at 7%, which is at what it's currently at.
I think one of the important things to note there, I'll stop you for a sec, is you said there in terms of like they're going up, right? Or going up in value. In reality, they're actually not, right? So this is the whole point of inflation. They're not actually going up in value. The cost to buy them is increasing, but you still only buy the same amount.
Correct.
What a liter of fuel a year ago that might have been $1 is now $2. Still only buys 1 liter of fuel. The bread, you're still getting your 13 slices or whatever the hell it is of bread, right? Like your 2 liters of milk, you're still getting your 2 liters of milk. The price has just changed. So if anything, and this is the whole point of inflation, guys, and what we will dive into further in this app, it's actually devaluing it. So it's worth less. Your dollar buys less. And there is a big reason for it, and that's where we're going to get further along in this episode about.
That's exactly right. And for example, a lot of people want to hold on to cash. Australians are very fixated on holding large cash reserves. So if you have $100,000 5 years ago and you don't spend $1, you will still have $100,000 today, 5 years later. But what that $100,000 can buy you 5 years later is far less.
Yeah, like a loaf of bread for $100,000 these days.
It's not Zimbabwe,
but yeah, it's not much, right? Like, and it decreases what you can actually buy, and that is the power of inflation.
Correct.
So it's really devaluing the dollar, devaluing the debt,
and that's on a very small scale. Like if you look on a year-to-year basis, what your money can buy you is less and less every single year.
Yeah.
If you compound that over a 10, 20, 30 year period, holding cash for a long period of time doesn't make any sense. The bank will give you, so you give the bank, you go into the bank tomorrow and you give them $100,000, they'll be like, perfect, thank you so much for that. And what they will do is they'll give you between 2 and 3% at the moment, and they'll lend you $100,000 out to somebody else, and they'll charge them a 6%. And
again, they make the market.
They make their margin, correct. But your 3% that you're actually getting in interest that they're giving you, you have to pay tax on that. That's income. So you don't even get the full amount that they're giving you.
You're losing outright across the board on it.
Correct. So you actually lose money by holding cash at the moment because inflation's going up by 7%. Your cash or the interest you get is only going up by 2 or 3%. So you lose money by holding cash. Yeah.
So let's talk about the fact that like interest rates have been on a ridiculous run, right? Like you said, 10 increases pretty much in a row, 4 of them being 0.5%, the remainder being 0.25s. We're still nowhere near, to be honest, guys, we're nowhere near the levels of when I bought my first property in 2009. I was borrowing money in the low 7s. We're still not there. Like you can still borrow money in the 5s. So we're still not there, right? Explain to us why you think, and I think this is the whole battle and this is the whole reason we've done interest rates versus inflation. Why are we now so high? Why have these increases come through so rapidly?
Reason, to put it simply, during COVID, so I'll take you back to the start.
Please, mate, please. Let's talk about COVID.
COVID, as the only thing more important to people other than interest rates. On COVID, went through the media rampantly, but during COVID...
Until everything eased up, and then about 2 months later, everyone's like, the fuck was COVID? I don't have a face mask anymore. Like, what's going on?
I got a vaccine for nothing.
I just spent 2 years in isolation. For what? Now everyone's got it anyway.
That's it.
Wow.
So during COVID, obviously everyone was locked down.
Yes.
You couldn't go out, you couldn't spend money. So if no one's going out, no one's spending money, the inflation is going down basically. Yes. So it went down to roughly 0.8%.
Yeah. And the economy was stalling, right? Because a lot of people weren't making money. A lot of people were out of jobs.
Correct.
There was a lot of, sorry, I'll let you continue. But that was a big part of it, right?
That's exactly right.
People weren't spending money.
People weren't spending money because they're like, what's going to happen? I'm going to keep a bigger cash buffer because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'm going to lose my job, etc.
But even the fact of like cafes were shut. There was times where shopping centers were closed. It was hard. You go to a shopping center, you have to scan in and they have to line up because there's a bloody, what do you call it? Like per square meter, a certain amount of people who go in. Gyms and everything closed down for a while there as well. So literally like money stopped flowing into the economy.
That's it. 2 people per cafe, 2 coffees at $5, $10 isn't all too much for cafe owners. So, no. It was a tough period for a lot of people. Yep. But what happened because of that is our inflation data dropped significantly. So we went down to 0.8%. So what we mentioned before, RBA want our inflation numbers to sit between 2 and 3%.
Yes.
That's really important. So basically the economy is stalling. So what do? How do we make people spend more money in the economy?
Luke. Tell me. I don't know the answer.
I know you don't know the answer. That's why you got me here.
The big guns.
So what they need to do is obviously give people more money. And how do I do that? Reduce the amount of money you spend on your largest expense. What's people's largest expense? Generally their mortgage. Yep. So if you're reducing the interest rate, it means they're spending less and less on their largest expense, which is their mortgage, and they have more surplus funds, which they can then use to go and spend in the economy.
Yes.
So they call it discretionary
spending.
Discretionary spending, that's correct.
Man, I think it's a big one there because it's like exactly as you say, like they literally did it to stimulate the economy, right? And this is what a lot of people are forgetting. It's like they dropped the interest rates like rapidly back then as well because they realized like we were going into recession. People were struggling, especially business owners and whatnot that weren't able to, even people who couldn't work, they were getting the handouts by the government as well. But there was a lot that was going on there where there was very little money going to the economy and very few people spending. A lot of people starting to get into a bit of strife. So they rapidly started decreasing the interest rates so that for one, people's cost of living would go down, but for 2, there would be surplus income as well. So then people could go out and discretionary spending would pick up and really start boosting that, right?
Yeah, correct. That's exactly right.
And then talk us through, so we fell down to 0.8%, like what's kind of transpired out of that of having interest rates as low as they were for as long as they were?
Yep. So what basically resulted from that was interest rates dropped, people had more money, they saved up a large amount of money while they were forced indoors, and Australians actually had one of the largest cash reserves they've had in a long time in terms of per household.
Especially because people also weren't travelling as well.
Correct, yeah. So they had a lot of money in reserve. So as soon as society opened back up again, they started spending rampantly, going on holidays, spending in the economy, buying new cars. You couldn't get a new car for 2 or 3 years at one point, like even if you wanted to.
Yep.
So what that obviously means, large amount of demand in the market. The economy is built on supply and demand. So if you've got heaps of people out spending, people can charge whatever they want. So the price of everything was going up and up, and our data was basically showing us that inflation was going up quite rampantly. It sort of got out of hand pretty quickly.
One of the other big things as well, before we run into that, right? One of the other big things which I think pushed it out of hand was obviously what's one of the big things that happens when people can't go out, they can't travel, right? So still making money, can't travel, can't buy a new car. There's only limited secondhand cars on the market now because there's a huge demand for that as well. So I'm not going to overpay for a car. What's the next thing I go and buy? I buy a house. Correct. Right? And then they also threw fuel on the fire. There's the old saying of fuel on the fire. There's also jet fuel on the fire. There's a nuclear freaking warhead, right? When they start throwing in stimulus like $25,000 builder's boost grants for anyone building a home, up to a certain dollar. I can't remember what it was, plus all the extra first home buyer grants and everything. What it then did was it put this huge additional pressure on housing and especially on building. So like there was a lot of these areas, I remember this so clearly, there's a lot of these areas were hugely oversupplied with land and whatnot as well. But then all of a sudden everyone wants land because there's these grants that are on the table, especially first home buyers. So like a lot, and that's where a lot of the affordable areas during the boom really went crazy because people were able to get in there, buy land pretty cheap, especially when there was surplus, and then build with all these grants. And I know a lot of people that were getting $50,000, $60,000 worth of grants and stamp duty exemptions and all the rest of it to build their first home. Plus they got nothing else to spend it on because I can't go to Europe this year. There's 20 grand saved. Can't buy a new car this year. There's another 30, 40 grand saved, something like that. And then I got 60 grand handed to me and I got the lowest rates ever in history. This is a piece of piss. What do people whinge about? Like, oh, getting into a house is the easiest thing ever, you know? And so then bang, like that is also a huge part of where a lot of the house growth came during COVID because it took away all this supply of land and then it got all these people into the market building, pushed up building costs, massive labor shortage, massive material shortages, build costs went through the roof. And then that in turn put pressure on existing and established property. What happens is everyone's going through buying all this stuff. Once again, another thing out there out there in the market that is then increasing rapidly during this period as well, which again is a huge sort of precursor and pressure on this upward trend in terms of inflation.
That's it. And we went to a period where builders couldn't even get stock.
Yeah.
They couldn't get basins. They couldn't get timber.
Yeah.
They couldn't get anything that they need to build homes because the demand was there.
And then they'd catch up on something. And it's like, oh shit, then the next thing's run out because everyone's like over-ordered of everything else because they know they're going to be in another shortage.
That's it. And then you had obviously our overseas suppliers. They were all locked inside. The factories shut down. We couldn't get anything. So people were overpaying for things because they needed it now. You
know what a huge thing was as well that a lot of people didn't realise? 2 years or 3 years ago now was the big bushfires, right? Everywhere the big bushfires that came through and ripped through, there was that really bad year. A lot of people don't actually realise the amount of timber, like softwood timber, like your treated pines and everything that everyone uses for framing. It was something ridiculous, like 90% of Australia's stores, timber stores, got wiped out during, I can't remember the exact number, it could even be more, got wiped out by the bushfires in Australia, right? And at the rate of building that we're at the time, we were in a little bit of a downish sort of market. It wasn't really affected that much. But then all of a sudden the market goes crazy and everyone's trying to build. There's no bloody timber. Yeah. So then the timber prices go ridiculous. I remember it tripled in, I think it was 2020, the price per linear meter of timber for framing and whatnot tripled. And then so what does everyone do then? They turn to steel. Or they turned to full brick homes and whatnot as well. And then they all went crazy. So it's just this flow and effect of all these different things that just drove the cost of everything, you know?
Bit of a perfect storm.
100%.
A lot of things combined all at the same time, which can't be overly factored for.
Yes.
A lot of people, especially in the media and society, are angry at the RBA because obviously there was the comments, we won't increase rates until 2024. And at the time, they thought that was the case. But at the end of the day, they can't go and say, no, we can't do anything now because we said that we wouldn't do anything till 2024.
Tell me why, Luke. Why couldn't they hold the gun and let inflation run to ridiculous levels? Why couldn't they do it? Why did they pull the trigger 2 years early?
Had to. If they were to let inflation run rampant, high levels of inflation around the world, there's plenty of examples of it, can cripple an economy quite quickly. Obviously, not many people know, but a fair few do. Zimbabwe. You can actually buy...
You love bringing this up to me. You always talk about Zimbabwe.
Because it's a great example.
Second wife or something in Zimbabwe, don't you?
Don't tell Talia. But in terms of their economy, the inflation went rampant. They went into hyperinflation. So you can actually buy things.
Hyperinflation.
Okay. That's it.
Explain that.
It's basically like inflation, once it goes past a certain point, will go up into hyperinflation. At about 25,000%. So I'm not suggesting that our economy would ever get to that state. Our economy is very, very different to theirs. But there's $100 billion note. So our $100 or $50 note, they have $100 billion note.
That's something I used to write as a kid to give someone, you know what I mean?
You're like, I owe you $100 billion. It's basically like the government over there. So you can actually go and buy bread milk with $100 billion note.
Wow.
Same as we do with a 50 or 100. And they have to accept it. It's currency. So.
Okay, so this idea of inflation running rampant and running ridiculous and hitting levels in the at the time, I remember when they started trying to curb it, we were talking 5, 6s now, and the 7s have been 7s for a while. The idea of it is to obviously to curb it, right? Like, there's a lot of people pissed off at the government because they said 2024, and then it started 2022. They start pulling the trigger and start doing, and they're not little increases. You know, there was consecutive months there of 0.5% at a time. Just run us through that again. Why is the big reason of why they've pulled the trigger early and kind of brought it in, and what's the whole idea of trying to curb it?
The whole idea, the way they curve it, for one, we'll go there first, is if you increase rates, you take away people's surplus funds. The higher your rate is, the less surplus funds you have.
So we're going back to the discretionary spending, right?
Correct.
That obviously went up when interest rates got cut.
Yep.
Now the discretionary spending has gone down because interest rates have gone up.
Correct.
Sorry.
So what that means is people have less money to spend in the economy.
Yes.
The less money being spent in the economy, the less things are going up in value. So the interesting fact is, though, that it's a bit of a blunt, like... Instrument, correct. Yes. So only a small portion of Australians don't have a mortgage.
Yes.
So it's roughly 30% of people don't have a mortgage. So a third of our population don't have any interest in interest rates.
Yes.
It doesn't affect them. They could put interest rates to 20%. If you don't have a mortgage, it doesn't affect you.
Yep.
So their surplus funds aren't affected. So what it means is the other portion of the population that are affected by interest rates have to generally suffer a bit more to counter for the people that aren't sort of affected by it.
There is one flip side to that, though, that you're maybe not factoring in. I might catch you out here. The big guns. What about the people that 30%, right? Does that also include renters?
No, the 30% is... So there's 30% that are renting, 35% that have a mortgage, and there's roughly 30% no mortgage.
No mortgage. Okay, so we're talking retirees, we're talking people that have owned property for a long time. Probably for a long time. Okay, sweet.
They haven't branched out into investment properties or anything like that. Bit of a plug to Australian Property Scout. But
come on, guys, release some equity. Let's go buy some deals.
That's it.
Become one of that. Increase that number.
So those that portion of the population isn't actually affected. So the portion that is have to suffer a little bit longer to counter the people that aren't. Yes, unfortunately.
And I think one of the big, I was just trying to catch you out there. I was saying if you're but like,
couldn't do it.
I think one of the big things as well is what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of those people that aren't carrying mortgages, they carry their surplus cash in a lot of the time in savings. And so for the last few years, a lot of the time they've been crying poor because the savings rate has been so low, which is fair enough, right? Like if that's where they've parked their cash, savings rate's been so low, now the interest rates have gone up so much, they're actually the ones laughing. They got no debt and they got some cash sitting in the bank. Now they're finally getting paid a little bit more. So they're the guys that are in probably a bit of a favorable period, favorable sort of space within their portfolio or within their journey, right? But it's the remaining 70% of Australians which are obviously quite heavily impacted by this as well. Because obviously the renters kind of, a lot of the time they're getting that pushed onto them. The rental, a lot of the time the interest rate sort of increases are getting pushed onto it. Onto the tenants in terms of what they're paying as well. And those that can't push it on, oh, well, there's not enough actual demand in this market. Well, there is in most of these markets, but let's say there isn't the actual precursor and the precedent to be able to push for that higher rent. Those people that can't afford it, then they take the properties back to the market. They sell those things and then it eats up the rental stock and that just continues. And then that's what actually drives the rental increases on that point anyway. Correct. So it can be a bit of a vicious cycle on that end and the way it can kind of move and work in this. And I think that's why it is so important to really be looking to build your wealth out so you don't get caught out by this. And one of the other big parts of what we do at Australian Property Scout is really working on your exit strategy as well. Because when you're working on your exit strategy, and a huge part of it is to get yourself to a very low debt level or over time get yourself debt reduced, you don't fall into this category that's hyper exposed to situations like this, especially if you've got a fair bit of leverage and a fair bit of debt. Yeah. But sorry, man, I stole your thunder. Speaking of storms, please continue.
So yeah, I agree. Perfect storm. Yeah. There's a lot of contributing factors, but what is the sort of thought on everyone's mind at the moment is basically, when will it stop? Everyone's wondering, when will they stop these increases? Yes. Nobody has a crystal ball, not even the RBA, know when they can actually start to curve these off. Yep. It's going to be a very, very careful balance, and it's really important to get right. Otherwise, we're going to have this same problem in 5 years' time. Yeah. So at the moment, our next lot of inflation data is 26th of April. Okay. So in Australia, we only get our inflation data quarterly. Whereas other countries get them monthly, which means that we're a bit more blunt in it's more reactive. Yeah,
a lot more lag data
that
we come off. Yeah.
Yep, that's it. So that next lot of data will be quite important to see what happens over the next sort of 12 months especially.
I actually think it's going to be very interesting as well, because I know when the February data came out, everyone's, they've raised interest rates, it's 100% going to come back and blah, blah, blah. And then it didn't. And people are like, why didn't it? And it's like, it's very easy to see why. We've gone in December, which is Christmas, and then we've gone into January, like the two biggest holiday times in the country where everyone's out spending, buying shit, buying gifts, doing all this sort of stuff. And then we hit February. Everyone's like, why didn't inflation get kept? So these are your two busiest months of the year. People spend money. You know what I mean? Like a lot of times, even if they don't have money, they go out and get credit cards. They need to buy the kids, Christmas gifts and everything. So I really do agree with the fact that this next lot of inflation data coming out, it's going to be very interesting to see how it comes out as well, because I don't think we're fully at the point where it's set in yet. We're actually going to do a potty on this soon as well. It's are we at the bottom yet? And I think it's a very interesting thing. A lot of people are trying to call that we're at the bottom of the market right now. Guys, interest rates haven't properly set in yet. There's a lot of people that are still on fixed rates of 1.99 or in the twos, and they're coming off this year. To call the bottom when we haven't even properly hit that wall yet, and they're calling it like the interest rate cliff. I think it's gonna be very interesting to see where that happens. And everyone knows I'm a property bull, right? Like I love property and I'm a massive bull on it. But you got to be aware, and that some of these markets you got to be a bit of a bear on, because if they're highly exposed to excessive debt, and these interest rates haven't come off yet. Guys, we are not at the bottom with a lot of markets in Australia right now, because they have not felt the full effects of it. You think about it, you borrowed money at 2% and you're about to roll off into 6%. Your interest rate, like your repayments are about to triple. There's going to be some pain, some hurt around that as well. So I think that's a topic for another day and something to talk about. But yeah, man, I think it's a very interesting one going on at the moment, and how long. And sorry, I'll let you kind of continue. I keep cutting you off, mate. I get too excited. Just want to jump in here and have a bit of a waffle. But I love waffles too. I don't know about you, man. They're good.
We'll have to grab some sometime.
Yeah, we'll go some waffles.
We'll go some after today.
After this, let's go. But yeah, man. Sorry. So we're talking about like how long now we're sort of thinking, and I think it's a great point as well. It's a great question, and something we've got to look at is obviously inflation data coming back. But one of the big things as well is they can't cut them back too early, right? Because they cut them back too early, and then inflation spikes again. Like we're in the same hole that we were in back then. So they've raised interest rates. They're trying to curb spending and stop people spending, essentially, in a way, trying to stall the economy, right? Like you and I have laughed about this before. We call it like a car or like a truck, right? Like slamming on the brakes. That's essentially what interest rates are, guys. So the inflation is the truck hammering down the freeway. And then we smack on the brakes, we pull up the handbrake, we're throwing everything on. The handbrake is the old 0.5%. The normal brakes are the 0.25s. We're doing everything that we can. And at the moment, we're still skidding. And the idea of it is we're skidding to try and come to a stop, right? We're trying to curb inflation. So we've pulled on these handbrakes. We've put everything we can on to try and curb inflation so we don't run into this hyperinflation, go into a stupid level of inflation, which is not going to be good for the economy. We need to stick it within the target band, right? Until this truck comes to a stop, or as close to a stop as it can, and then we can slowly let it back out and keep running, right?
Correct. So that's the balance I was talking about.
Yes.
We can't have it skid to a complete stop, because if it goes back under 1% again, we're going to have the same issue in 5 years' time, where inflation goes to 0.5%, and we're going to have to drop rates ridiculously to stimulate the economy.
A roller coaster.
It's going to be a big roller coaster
Yes.
of disappointment for the economy too.
Yeah.
A lot of people out there are not so much hurt, but disappointed that they felt misled, that they were going to have these interest rates for a long period of time. However, we can't have it skid to a stop. It needs to be a sort of a balance. We're skidding we're at 2 to 3%, and then we're going to sort of try and get the wheels moving again to keep it in that 2 to 3%, which is a very, very difficult balance to have. I'm not jealous of the RBA's role. It would be a tough job. They get a bad rap.
But they've got one instrument, right? They've got one instrument to try and curb this thing.
That's it. It's very blunt.
Yeah, it is blunt. But man, I think it's like, it's one of those balancing acts, like you said. And I think like it's one of those things that they can get right. And the people who are going to be exposed here are the people who may be like overextended on what they should have bought. But the vast majority of people, we'll jump into one sec, right? But like in terms of like how long until they start clipping them again, it's very interesting at the moment that a lot of banks are talking about early, either some point next year, right? Either the start or the end of next year, they're going to start clipping them back a bit, right? So it's only really going to be those people that are really struggling, that have really overextended and are massively feeling the pain and maybe can't curb that discretionary spending. And so they've caught themselves out. They've got no savings. They've caught themselves out. But that'll be a very small percentage of the population as well. So there'll be a little bit of hurt here and there around the place. But everyone else will just try and hang on. And most people will be able to hang on. And then they'll cut them back. And again, this is another episode that you and I are going to cover at some point as well, in terms of, even in terms of like right now, people looking with a very small vision, a very small mindset of like, oh, well, I can't get something that's $1 a year positive, so I'm not going to buy. And it's like, man, like these things are only going to stick around for the period of time that they need to be around for. Then they're going to curb them. They're going to pull them back in terms of interest rates. And you're going to miss out on this great buying window where a lot of people are thinking the same thing, which in my opinion is an uneducated view on when not to buy as well. And so, yeah, man, like I think it's like, it kind of opens that window of opportunity of uncertainty in the market that they can then, get in and sort of build at this time as well.
And the market's very fearful at the moment. Everyone's very scared. What's going to happen? Are we going to have another 5 increases? Like, how long is this going to go for? Everyone's fearful. And there's that many good deals out at the moment. And that's not even like what we're sort of looking at now. Warren Buffett's very famous for it. Buy when the market's fearful and you sell when they're greedy. By the time interest rates start to taper off some point next year, like you said, no one knows exactly when that'll happen. But when that does happen, everyone will flood back into the market. We're tapering off. Interest rates are coming back down. We've got inflation under control. The market will see a big spike in terms of investor interest in the markets, own occupiers getting back in. And that will obviously cause a bit of a price jump, which is perfect for our clients at 100%. The moment, which are obviously accumulating in their portfolios. They're great comparable sales in sort of 12 months time. For our clients now. So you might hold $1,000 or $2,000 negative at the moment, or it's neutral even with some of the deals. But when they come, interest rates start to taper off, they will come positive again as well.
100%, man.
But they'll make the big discount on the way in and then have those comparable sales with people just jumping back in the market as well.
Definitely. I think a good thing too is like, and one really important thing to note is it doesn't affect the whole economy, because a lot of the time when your inflation runs And it actually, in terms of both sides, when inflation runs and when interest rates increase as well, a lot of investors want to get into those affordable areas where they can still get really good yields, because they still want to invest, but they might be capped by a certain amount of yield. I know I had that quite early on the journey as well. And then inflation actually is still pushing up purchase prices. So you know what I mean? And it's pushing up the build cost. So that always moves the bottom end of the market. It always moves that floor bottom end of the market. It always keeps increasing when inflation is going as well. So it's actually a really interesting thing, man. Like a lot of the areas that we're buying, and I'm actually extremely confident of double-digit growth in the next 12 months as well. But I think the cool thing will be is that in 12, 18 months, they start clipping them back. People are going to look at, where was actually performing over the last 12 to 18 months, 2 years. Oh shit, that area grew. I did double digits for each year for the last 10 years. That must be a good spot. Bang, they're going to hammer in and pile into those markets as well. Because obviously they've still got all the fundamentals. There might have been people sitting on the sidelines watching it grow, but being too fearful to jump in. They're going to jump in and they're going to push our guys' property prices up even further as well, which I'm excited about, man. I'm always actively searching and buying. And you laugh when you sit and I speak to my brokers, like, hey, what'd you buy that for? Are you kidding me? Like, oh shit, like another one. You're still going. These things go into the portfolio. So there's always opportunity out there to be buying and building the portfolio as well.
And that's something we're going to expand on over the next few months as well. When we talk about affordability,
yes,
because affordability is sort of very much influenced by interest rates.
Yes.
Because obviously interest rates at the moment, people in COVID, 2% interest rate, you have to be assessed 3% above what interest rates are at currently.
Yep.
So if interest rates are 2%, you're being assessed at 5%. Now they're sort of 6 or 7, you're being assessed at 9%.
Yes.
So 9% on $1 million loan, that's 90 grand a year in interest.
Yes.
So those markets that are sort of overvalued or sort of a higher price point, there's less and less people that can afford to buy in those markets. So 90 grand interest on $1 million loan is a lot of money for a lot of people. So
and hard to hold.
Correct.
That's hard to hold. If people were borrowing it a lot less.
That's
very
exactly
hard to hold.
So that affordability is something we'll go into, and why we look at some of the areas we look at over the next sort of few months when we go through some different episodes. But affordability and interest rates are really important to look at as well. But I know we're not talking about that tonight.
I'm not talking about that today. That's right. Man, it's a funny one as well, because I remember you said to me before we jumped on this, it's almost like a tale of two evils, right? Interest rates and inflation. The funny thing is, man, I don't really look at them as evils, right? For one, if you look at interest rates, like one thing about interest rates is bank lending you money. Okay, that's like leveraging. So it's like one of those things that we need to take on. And what people have got to realize is, for the last few years, you've had it better than anyone's ever had it in Australian history. Don't forget that. You know what I mean? You've had that, and now we're at a time where you've got to pay a bit more. And that's all part of it. And you should build a portfolio that can weather that storm. But at some point, next 12 to 18 months most likely, they're going to curb that back down. And then we're going to be back at a normal sort of equilibrium that allows you to play the game the way the game's always been played, at very, very normal interest rate environment. And that's when we can get back to the game. But I wouldn't be looking at it as an evil. It is a necessary cost to do business, to build wealth. You're leveraging. You just make sure you're managing your cash flows properly, and you're sweet and you're fine, right? But then on the other side, if you look at inflation, and people kind of think and talk about that as an evil as well, what a lot of people don't realize is inflation devalues debt, right? So the whole idea of accumulating and building a large portfolio over time, the whole idea of that is that over time, even if you're carrying a level of debt, it's even within my exit strategy. I always talk about leaving about 20 to 30% LVR on a portfolio at the back end. Why do I do that? Because at the back end, if you've got a $5 million portfolio, you've got a 20%, or let's say 25% LVR, right? Sorry, 20% LVR, you're sitting on $1 million worth of debt on a $5 million portfolio. If that's a very high yielding portfolio, you're killing it. You're sweet. But to pay $1 million out, that's a lot of debt. You know what I mean? That's a lot to pay out in one hit. But if you carry that for the next 10 years, let's say your $5 million portfolio goes to 10, and then your $1 million debt stays at $1 million, it costs a lot less to hold that thing. It's like that example before. It's kind of the flip of the example before of your liter of milk and your liter of fuel and all that sort of thing going up. It's the same thing as your values and your rents and everything is going up, but your debt stays the same. And the easiest way I explain this, it's like when people bought, let's say in Sydney 30 years ago for 100 grand. If you held that thing at 100% LVR, in 30 years, that property is probably now worth $1.5, $2 million. If you held it at 100% debt, that's 100 grand. You probably pay that thing off in 1 year of rent from having held that property. I hope that makes sense to people. That makes sense to you? I explained that well enough?
No, it did.
Yeah, so it's just like, you've got to realize, like, these things are your friends. Like the banks, you got to realize, like, yes, interest rates suck. It's all the rest of it. It is what it is, but it's a small window in a long-term play that you might have a little bit of hurt in this period, right? Inflation, it's one of those things, like, it's the other flip side as well. Everyone's rents most of the time are increasing across a lot of properties too. A lot of the time that is driven by inflation and the same run that we're on and all those sort of things as well. A lot of the time you'll watch rental growth grow. It may far exceed. I know a lot of areas have done 20, 25% rental growth per year for the last couple of years. Inflation's been at 5, 7%. But a lot of the time when we go through a high inflationary period, it's when your rents go through rapid growth as well. So I think it's like, it's a very interesting time and yeah, I actually look at both of them as it's kind of like your friend, because over the long term, inflation is going to be the thing that eats away your debt over the long term as well. So I hope that made sense, guys. If it didn't, just write in if you need me to explain it again, or explain it more simply. Maybe I went for a bit of a waffle again.
Just expand on it, give him as many points as possible so he can go line by line. But that's exactly right. And a lot of listeners, our listeners are very intelligent in terms of a lot of the people I'm speaking to on the phone have a really good understanding of how the economy works and how interest rates work. But for a majority of society, where they get their information from is from mainstream media, sort of the weekday news kind of thing. So they're all doom and gloom. Interest rates are going up, like the world's ending, but what you just went through, that's important to remember.
100%.
Interest rates going up, yes, it is an impact to a lot of people, but it's sort of the thing that we needed to curb inflation, so that we can get back on track to sort of what we're trying to do long term. Because left unchecked, it doesn't really result very well for many people.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Lukey, mate, I think we did all right on this one. I think we covered off a fair bit. Is there anything else you want to throw in?
No, I think that's it. I think we covered everything.
You good?
Yeah, all good.
Beautiful, mate. Mate, thank you very much.
I didn't get any shark bites today. I'm pretty lucky. It must just be Jimmy. Jimmy must
he's like the burley in the drink. You just look at him when you want to bite him. You know what I mean? Like, you're just chill, man. You rocked up. You're relaxed. You pump it through. You're giving some good content. Like, I don't know, man. Jimmy, he's just a lackluster sort of bloke, So
empty pockets.
Empty pockets, full of dust. No, we love him. We love the old dog.
Yeah, I'll probably get some listeners giving some death threats because they want Jimmy back.
They want Jimmy.
You will have riots outside going, we want Jimmy.
Maybe. I'll give out Jimmy's address so everyone can go around there.
And his mobile phone number.
That's it. Now, Lukey, mate, once again, buddy, I really appreciate you jumping on, man. It was a lot of fun. And yeah, man, I really, really appreciate it. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed that. We covered off on a lot of stuff. It's a question that a lot of you guys have been sending in, so I hope you took a lot of value out of it. If you did take some good value from it, anything at all, and you think you have any friends that maybe could take a bit of advice and a bit of a bit of learnings from this stuff as well, of anyone that you know that kind of been talking about this too, please share it around. Something that I really love to do with this space and with this community of what we're trying to build here is we're trying to build like-minded people that are thinking and investing the same way as us. Whether you use, Australian Property Scout, one of the best buyers agencies in the business, nominated once again as a finalist for Buyers Agency of the Year. I'll just throw that in there real quick, guys. Whether you want to use us or not, or go along this on your own journey, either is completely fine. But you want to build that inner circle of people that are thinking exactly the same way as you, or thinking along the same vein, so people aren't trying to stop you in your journey saying, oh, you sure about this, you sure about that. Here, listen to this podcast. This explains it. This is what you want to be doing, guys. Be building your knowledge base and building your inner circle of people thinking the same way as you. All right? If you're enjoying this, please leave us a 5-star review if you haven't done it yet. Keep the testimonials coming in as well, guys. We are getting very close to the worm. I've been told next time Jimmy is in the studio, there may be a release. It may be coming out, guys. So make sure you're tuning in for that on the next one. And yeah, guys, make sure you're subscribing, and anyone you're sending it to, get them to subscribe as well. Like we were saying before, guys, this obviously is powered by Australian Property Scout Buyers Agency. If you want any help building your portfolio, either through the property strategizing, whatever it is that you're trying to do within your portfolio as well, if you want to take your portfolio to the next level, take it into the top 1% of investors in Australia, please reach out. As always, www.australianpropertyscout.com. australianpropertyscout.com.au or find us on the socials at Australian Property Scout. And any other questions, guys, as always, we have in the show notes of wherever you're listening to this to, there is a link with an email. Please send through any questions you've got there. If you can't work it out, Jimmy was stumbling around the other day. I don't think he's got email. He tried posting in his questions. He could have just told me. But anyway, any of you guys that maybe struggle with that, just jump on the social handles and direct messages as well. That always does reach us too. Otherwise, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Another episode of the Scouting Australia podcast. Until next week, guys, have a good one.